Welcome to Clever Orbit's favorite Star Trek podcast. Probably, if you're listening, it is your favorite. I know that sounds presumptuous. Today, we are discussing Clues by Star Trek The Next Generation with Tyler Brandmeier, Richard Futrell, and a special guest who I'm going to save until Tyler and Richard give their customary greetings. How you doing, guys?
Hello.
Hi, everyone.
It wouldn't be you guys without the exact same greetings in the exact same inflections every time. And then finally, self-acclaimed PhD in nothing, which is a really exciting idea, actually. Daniel Stark. Daniel, so great to have you, man, our guest star.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it's wonderful to be here and to be talking with you guys today. I am indeed very well-versed in absolutely nothing.
that will provide no end of fascination and hilarity for me. So you were the chooser of this episode. So before I create the first meanings around it to suggest, let me ask, why did you choose this one? What has it be? I'm guessing one of your favorites.
This is, to me, one of those episodes that you could sort of not necessarily think about first and foremost when you think about Next Generation, but the reason I chose it, because I'm a big Data fan, so throughout the whole sort of canon of Next Generation, Data is, I guess, maybe like that generation's Spock. You love Data for everything he is and everything he isn't, and there's always sort of comedic things, and then there's heroic things, or not necessarily heroic because he's an android, but in this particular case, Data is basically protecting, or at least trying to protect, the crew and the ship from imminent destruction, as always. And I think what I loved about it is that, later on, and when we get to talk about the episode, there's a directive that Picard gives him, which is basically to keep a secret until forever and ever and ever, until his life ends, which for Data could be eons, right? So there's something about that sort of loyalty and his service, and just the fact that you can always count on Data to save the crew. So that's one of the reasons I chose it. And there's of course some interesting parallels that come up throughout the episode from other episodes, and all of the characters that sort of play in this episode are sort of classic themselves in a way, and we can talk about that. So yeah, I think there's just a lot of reasons why this is one of those like little episodes that actually has some really great plot lines and great meaning.
Love that. I love all of that. Yeah, it's beginning. Thank you. It's beginning to creep up on me, the depth that was in this episode, and I ascribe my hitherto incapacity to have detected that depth to a lack of proper nutrition and sleep. Yes, that's what we're going to start with. So for the customary opening salvo, I'm just going to say that this does definitely feel like the whole episode feels like the kind of nightmare that Richard would be trapped in when he sleeps, or the kind of nightmare that Richard would have regularly, but without actually having an answer, like the episode minus those last 10 minutes. Our long-standing listeners probably get that. What? Yes? Oh, is it? I mean, it's not quite David Lynch, but it's somewhat disturbing. And I agree that the characterization is actually is really the beating heart core of this episode, both of Data and then of the other people around him who, like in a, oh my goodness, in a stark move, they start to turn and look at Data with skeptical concern in a way that they have never before and will never again. And,
that's right.
Data starts to appear really alien for a little bit. And that alienness turns into a virtue that the viewer carries knowledge of with themselves into the very end of the episode. However, it's like a certain kind of willingness to do the thing that would be impossible for other people, and the unique virtue of having someone who is just radically different around you, who can serve in a way that might be impossible for you. And I guess how we all kind of need each other, because without data, they'd all just be dead, or
That's right.
Something similar. However, the other characters do get portrayed well enough. I mean, they're pretty robustly shown throughout Next Gen. I don't think anybody was really underserved except Geordi's love life. They all play their part in distinguishing themselves kind of from data, and then seeing and observing what's going on with data in a way that drives the plot. So it never felt artificialized. It never felt forced. It always felt kind of like, all right, well, they're naturally intelligent and curious and capable, and so of course they're going to start asking questions and finding interesting answers. So that's kind of my overall gloss. Of course, I've got a lot more on the specifics. But Richard, let's hear from you, man. What did the dreamer think of the dream?
I do often have dreams where I'm trying to figure something out and I can never quite get there. And it's often a waking dream.
I'm so sorry. I was joking.
No.
I'm so sorry that you actually have this experience.
So I see this episode sort of through two frames, and they kind of interleave with each other. The first is man versus machine. This episode is a contest between the sort of organic curiosity and exploration and seeking nature of the Enterprise crew and Data's mechanical, rationalistic attempts to obscure something from them and to prevent them from leading themselves into a catastrophic situation. And that's reflected in all the incredibly nuanced character interactions they have and all the incredibly nuanced ways in which Data lies or is evasive, like the ways that he says things like, I cannot confirm that hypothesis, trying to clearly minimize the extent to which he is actually lying, but he's being evasive in a very mechanical way, as against the very organic reactions he's getting from the crew, like Picard is angry at him and saying, what about your career? And, Riker also seems downright angry with him after that conference they all have. So there's this man versus machine aspect to this, the organic seeking humans that are trying to figure out the mystery and the mechanical thing that's trying to keep them away from the disaster. The other angle on this is I think there's actually an interesting connection here with the idea of defense mechanisms from Freudian psychology. Are you familiar with this?
No.
So in Freudian and Jungian and the whole psychoanalytical tradition in psychology, there's this idea that a big part of what our rational conscious brain does is its purpose is actually not to guide us so much as to prevent us from finding out uncomfortable truths about ourselves. Truths such as, actually you're just a meaningless, you're just a, soulless piece of meat or something like that. These kinds of traumatic things. The idea is that your talking self, your rational self, largely exists to prevent you from finding these things out, and that often takes the form of sort of endless excuses that you make that prevent you from doing things that might put you in contact with these sort of traumatic truths. What's going on in this episode is that Data is this rational self who's always trying to come up with excuses. He's always trying to come up with arguments to prevent a horrible disaster, which is these aliens that have the ability to kill them. And the crew is always pushing against this because of their curiosity, because of their explorational nature, like how Picard says, we're explorers. We don't mean you any harm. And so ultimately, trying to fight them off is kind of pointless because curiosity is going to drive them back into the horrible secret in the same way that in Freudian psychology they say that things like psychosis result because you just sort of can't stop sort of scratching that itch, trying to solve the mystery of what's really going on, and your rational brain's trying to defend you, but eventually you might come into contact with these kinds of things. So that's two angles. That's what I got.
That's pretty remarkable, actually. This is where the frontier pushes back, to quote.
Yeah. No, and you can see this as a sort of
Beyond. Yeah.
This is a kind of like, so one of the interesting things you can do in Star Trek is you can take the Star Trek ideal, which is that we're explorers and we're curious, which is a very positive thing, and you can say, well, when does that become negative? When does that become almost self-destructive even? And in this case, the crew would be better off if they left well enough alone and they were stopped being explorers for a second and they stopped trying to solve the mystery. But it's just going to lead them back and back into this. So at the end of the episode, in my opinion, they didn't really resolve the problem. They just said, okay, well, let's cover things up again and not leave any clues this time. And they don't say how they do that. Like, what do they do about those plants, right? And so as far as I could tell, they might just get caught at this infinite loop where they just keep on going back, and that's why it's very, in fact, quite nightmarish. And the thing that's going to keep driving them back is going to be their curiosity, which is exactly the thing Star Trek's usually about celebrating. So it's a very interesting episode.
It's actually really subtle. I really appreciate that. Like, we've, in the past, when we've talked about Discovery, which the depiction of Harry Mudd there, he talks about, like, hey, you guys, you're explorers, and then you got into somebody's yard who didn't like you there, and now there's a war that we're all suffering from because of you. Or you get Krall in Star Trek Beyond saying, hey, among other things, right, that he said, like, hey, the frontier, you shouldn't just be exploring. Like, that's dumb. Mm-hmm. Like, we should be focusing on military development and all of this. And I think in all of Star Trek, this happens to be the best interrogation of the ideal of at least part of the ideals of Star Trek. Like, and it's natural. It's natural because to boldly go where no man has gone before also means to go in kind of the opposite direction to which your natural inclinations might take you sometimes, mm-hmm. or to interrogate those inclinations and reintegrate them with something more rational, more reasonable, more healthy, ultimately. And so, yeah, I definitely see your points, and I really appreciate them. And, in fact, I'm glad that Star Trek finally found a place. We found one where this gets done well, because it was not done well as an interrogation in Star Trek Beyond. And it wasn't on the plate other than to be pointed to in Discovery, like, oh, yeah, this is a thing. This is a thing. And I like that the tension doesn't actually get resolved. The curiosity, the negotiation between curiosity and danger, so to speak, it does just get sidestepped. And so the philosophical quandary is still there for us to chew on. And, I'm sure there's some anthropological work we could do on the tension between the drive for security and survival and on the other hand, curiosity and the desire to explore. This takes so many different forms, right? We go to the movies to be exposed to unfamiliar stimuli, and yet we come back home to the same house, and we like having the same family and friends and routines and all of this. So that it's a very paradoxical coexistence within the human psyche and then the human civilization, both of these drives. And I don't know that the writers fully appreciated the depth and the breadth of the themes that they were beginning to delve into here, but they certainly opened a door to and gracefully left open that door to a place for a lot of questions. So anyway, yeah, this is great. This is why this isn't just me, because I didn't have any of this. And thank you, Richard. So Tyler, I'm sure. Please don't just tell us that you liked it.
I loved it.
Oh, bless you. Did you like the acting?
Well, as always, of course. Yeah, good performances all around, especially by Brent Spiner. The police procedural aspects, where they follow the clues and discover what exactly happened in that day they went missing, instead of the 30 seconds that Data told them. That was an interesting angle. I liked. Let's see. What did I like? No Wesley Crusher. That's always good. Riker's beard shows up again. It's the best part of every episode. One other thing I had to say. Worf's going to discover his wrist was broken eventually. It's not something that you just forget about. Among other things that you all have already pointed out, their curiosity will be their undoing. In this very particular instance, you know what I didn't see? I did not see the Paxons identify themselves as Paxons once. Now, that could have been done off-screen to Data when they were first discovered. But, I don't know. Just an interesting point. Anyway, I loved it. That's about it. Good performances all around. Although Worf should find a better way to fall.
Especially when he gets thrown unexpectedly. Of course, there are all these videos on YouTube of Worf just getting owned, and with captions like, he's not that good a fighter, but he keeps trying no matter how many times he gets brutally beaten. And for such a great warrior, humans. That's true. Maybe he was weakened by them overall. Or maybe it's one of those. Maybe Worf is like a mega red shirt. Like they can't really kill him to prove the situation is serious, but they can have him get hurt bad over and over. So speaking of Worf, I thought it was great to see him kind of draped over his station, like drapes, I guess. And when Tyler, you said about the police procedural thing. At first, I thought you were complimenting the cold open, like the beginning sequence with Dixon Hill, which I could really do without. But, the cold open itself was good. And in retrospect, I have a lot of respect for the Dixon Hill stuff. And here's why. It wasn't longer than it was. It was exactly as long as it needed to be. We legitimately only needed exactly what we saw in order to introduce the themes of the episode. We didn't need – and then Guinan, that was interesting too. It's like she shows up and then she's gone. Like, we don't see her again. She, like, where did she go? I guess they couldn't come up with lines for her with their emphasis on Data. And somehow she's not quite involved.
I just assume that Guinan had never actually come in touch with the Paxtons before and how old she was. So I figured they just didn't need her.
That's true. There's nothing she's really got to contribute, other than maybe making drinks for these people who are confused and a little bit disturbed. Tyler, I agree with in the matter of Riker. I loved when he looks over at Data while he's talking to Picard, and Picard's kind of taken, right? But Riker's got this spidey sense for there's something ain't right here. And you can see he's the very first person to start getting skeptical of Data. He has this look about him, and he's willing to follow Picard's lead. Like we've noted that before, I think last year, a couple of times, how humble, coachable, willing Riker is to learn and to embrace the depths of the long career expertise of Picard. And this is one of those times that I think it was a mistake. Honestly, I mean, he has been seasoned, as Troy says, in Best of Both Worlds by this point. So he's got a willingness to allow his basic instincts to take second seat to following Picard's lead. He's kind of strapped in for this apprenticeship, basically. But it just so happens that in this particular case, he saw something that no one else did, if I'm reading that look correctly, and he didn't push or. Maybe another way of reading it is he waited, right? So maybe that could just be the fact that he's so seasoned that he didn't point out what he saw or what he intuited until later when there was evidence to back him up in the form of Crusher, at which point the pattern was clear. That's when it comes to characterization. And then just one note before we move to you, Daniel, on the Paxtons. I'm pretty sure that the Paxtons are a subset of humanity who just chopped at Paxton so much that it evolved into a religion, and they evolved beyond the need for bodies or clothes, ironically enough. Clearly someone somewhere. Richard, you sound like you have something on that.
That was my laughter.
Okay, me not being able to understand that is great. It is more funny than my joke itself. We're 2 for 2 today. So Daniel, please, any and everything.
Yeah, sure. You mean more about the episode? Yeah, of course. So it's funny because you mentioned the Dixon Hill part, which is essentially how it starts. The episode starts with them, they're on, Worf is going through what looks like sort of Klingon Tai Chi with people in one of the rooms, and then we go to the Dixon Hill sort of part. I think the part that I liked is that Whoopi Goldberg comes in, Guinan comes in as Gloria from Cleveland, and not only am I from Cleveland, but I happen to be there right now. So I sort of felt it was a nice nod to my hometown in the 24th century. But I think one of the other things that stuck out to me in the episode is, Troy always sort of is not one of my favorite characters, but she always seems to have sort of selective powers. And in this particular case, there's a scene where she's looking in the mirror, And she says, I don't see my, I see another's face, or I don't see my own face, something like that. And she's so distressed. But, normally she would actually sense another presence. And so it's interesting, we don't know anything about the Paxons other than that they're xenophobes and they never want to be discovered ever. But, they obviously have some pretty remarkable powers. Among them, blocking Deanna's abilities, her sort of extra cognitive abilities. They're able to destroy the ship at will. They're able to create fake wormholes. So there's sort of this interesting thing about powers in this episode. I love some of the stuff that you guys are talking about too. Getting very, very deep about man versus machine and the psychology of it, which is, of course, awesome because I didn't really see it through those lenses. But that's, of course, why we talk about it, right? So, but this whole thing about powers and the powers of the, we've seen some pretty awesomely powerful aliens through all these episodes. But the Paxons seem to be very powerful, and they're seemingly just an energy beam or something like that.
Yeah, their powers aren't very well explained, but they are extremely powerful. That is true. And it was necessary, I think, for the plot such that the characters, the whole team runs up against this no-win scenario where, these we can't negotiate. They do actually, in classic next-gen fashion, negotiate their way out of it, basically. But there's no way to fight it out. There's no way to manage the situation in a way that Kirk would. I mean, Kirk would bluff them or try to do something to have them escape or whatever, and
strong-arm them or something.
Yeah. And I think this actually points to what I would argue is the evolved sensibilities. We keep going back to this since we did our first Contact episode of the 24th century versus the 23rd and the 22nd. 22nd with Jonathan Archer, we see they're really stumbling. There's bumbling, completely bumbling humans. And then by the 23rd century, there's a little bit more poise and a little bit more diplomacy and procedures and, experience. But it strikes me that humanity in general reaches its apex in Star Trek, and this, fits with, I guess, the assumptions that most people would make in the 24th century. And not just because of better technology, but because there are a lot fewer of the impulses we see, like in Balance of Terror in the original series. We see rampant racism or, just there's this willingness to peacefully coexist. And it isn't just the party line. Like it is something that resonates down to the core of, how people are in the world. And what we talked about in the first Contact episode was how, Picard's Achilles heel in that movie is that he has been so socialized so effectively, unlike us in the modern, the 20th and 21st centuries when this was first aired and then when it, came to prominence, with the 50th anniversary and all this, we are exposed continuously to images of violence and in the news and things that actually happen. And so there's a subconscious priming. And, we do still have free volition in all of this, but, we are influenced by a culture where violence happens and bad things happen and injustices persist. And so by the time of the 23rd century, we kind of have the ability to go without those things. And by the 24th, it's been so rooted out that Picard doesn't even recognize the impulse for revenge in himself as what it is. As a driving, motivating force in his fight against the Borg in that movie. And so here it's all the more kind of sharp, the quickness to diplomacy as the answer and negotiation. And then it's also, both disturbing from the point of view of Data doesn't lie, but also he's been enculturated within this same culture, where the instinct is not to snap into deception. And so they are doubly disturbed because Data doesn't lie and people don't lie generally. So there's a weight to that I at least see there in the dealings with the Paxons. And the other thing too, ironically enough, one thing I saw in this episode was Data does this little thumb tapping thing at one point. I'm not sure if anybody else noticed this, but very early on. Yeah. And so from like the fourth season on, his with notable exceptions, like the movies, they kind of scaled him back in some ways to the detriment of the character's development. But what I saw in Data was a characterization development to the point where he is basically mimicking humans pretty well. And, by the time of the end of the seventh season, he's really good at it. And, his quest to be human is pretty successful. So it was nice to see that little thumb tapping thing because it was like, okay, yeah, writing him very consistently and very precisely. And it also, I don't know, I think what's funny, too, about this episode is it really leans heavily on having Data show up as an AI, as an android, in doing and being in ways that just don't make sense to humans, or wouldn't be intuitive or easy for humans. So, I like that he has to hold the burden of the weight of knowledge of what happened at the very end. There's this just infinitely trustworthy facet of his character that is really cool. So anyway, I don't mean to monopolize. Who's got some more? Daniel?
Yeah, I mean, it's really amazing when you put it in that frame for Data, because Data to me has always been the crew member that I most want to emulate, even though he's not human, right? He wants to be the most human, but he has this ability to shield emotion and to shield, sort of all of the human traits that sometimes are seen as bad, or sometimes I might have a judgment of being bad, which are probably based in emotion. And then he's got all these other traits there. Loyalty is probably also rooted in emotion, right? But he's so great in so many ways because, and so I always saw that. And it's funny you pointed out the finger tapping, because I did notice that, and I ascribed it to being some kind of nervous twitch more than actually an emulation of humanity. You're probably right. But yeah, I sort of saw it as being I sort of saw it as he knows the truth, and you could see sometimes, in his look. Brent Spiner was obviously great at playing an android, but you could sort of see that he was sometimes, staring intently on something or cocking his head a little bit as he did when people were on to him, and he was always sort of looking for a way to sort of, redirect them. So I sort of saw Data as being, in a way, more human in that way, right? Trying to protect them and redirect them, but not as an affect, but as actually something that is, now hardwired into who he was.
Yeah, I like that sort of added possible layer of he is emulating the behavior of humans who are being evasive with the truth. Right. The thumb tapping is an actual nervous tick based on the fact that he knows he is having to do this. And of course, in that context, he's not getting it. Well, it's funny because he's not built to be a liar. So, if he were programmed to be good at lying, which then that would make him Lore or something. Lore wasn't actually even programmed that way, but ended up that way. So, yeah, it's cool. Richard, what else you got, man?
Well, it's interesting to compare Data and his lying with HAL 9000 from 2001: A Space Odyssey. So in that movie, HAL 9000 is this ultra-rational computer, and he's ordered to lie, and as a result, he goes crazy and kills the crew. Whereas in this, Data is ordered to lie, and he doesn't go crazy. He, taps his thumb a little maybe. But I think it's nice that the authors recognize that, being forced to lie is not going to make a computer go crazy. It's just going to make its computation a little more complicated. And, maybe Data is stressed out inside because he's not used to doing this, and so his, systems would maybe his systems are actually producing something which is analogous to nervousness in humans. But Geordi did his scan and Data's doing fine. I think it's really cool that basically Data doesn't have a problem with this.
I guess he doesn't have a problem with it because he was ordered to, though, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's not like it. So it's an interesting question if he was actually programmed not to lie, or if he was just programmed to follow orders, and then someone gave him the order never to lie.
Well, it's also about the distinction of lying as defined in his matrix of in his positronic matrix, because it does seem like when it comes to actual deception theory, right? There's falsification and then there's concealment, and we are all of us at all times, potentially subject to the criticism of concealing things, both from ourselves in a whole vast variety of ways that we just don't see and don't know about ourselves, and then also just like what is full disclosure? What is, I mean, and then in, drama, soap operas or whatever, you get questions from one character to the other, like, you didn't think you should have told me about this or something? Like the very fact that question shows up in cultural discourse means that there's no clearly agreed on setup of like, this is what you have to disclose to everyone. And, this is what is expected of you. Truth-telling is not always a inescapable and comprehensive moral duty. So, falsification generally is the thing that shows up more prominently culturally as deception. And it's the thing that, most violates the social contract, because we expect when people do speak and do communicate that they're doing so in order to communicate meaningful information that we can all use as a basis for surviving and thriving. And so with Data, I think that he was programmed with an orientation towards not falsifying. And that shows up in how he answers all these questions, as Richard pointed out. Like he's always very careful. And I think Starfleet training probably gives you that predilection to tell the truth. And, the whole truth insofar as it's safe and healthy and good and nothing but. And he's kind of had to make a course correction and an adjustment to the execution or the implementation of that, given Picard's orders. But he never acts. I mean, so then we can get into kind of splitting hairs, because what arrives in the minds of the people who he talks to, like Picard and Riker, are kind of assumptions based on indications and suggestions from Data, and whether or not that's exactly tantamount to lying, maybe not. I mean, it feels like maybe splitting hairs. Go ahead.
But we've seen Data lie before, or we've seen him bend the truth before, certainly. Certainly with Lore he did. And I'm certain that collectively we've come up with at least a few instances where he didn't fully tell the truth.
Oh, yeah, you're right. First Contact, for example, yeah. He lies to the Borg Queen, right, or he leaves her with the wrong impression.
Exactly, right. I mean, exactly. He feigned that whole thing for several scenes, So he's capable of it. He obviously knows that it's a tool that he can use when necessary. So I don't think he's necessarily been programmed in a certain way to always tell the truth. I mean, I would agree with you that his proclivity is to be in integrity, and so to speak, and to tell the truth. But, he's also quite smart and cunning when he needs to be.
Yeah, I do. I think maybe he was emulating humans to the degree that he was trying his best, a process of using his cunning to honor his word and, not allow them to come into contact with this horrible thing, truth, to minimize the damage, and to not do harm in the process of executing the orders, and hence comes his leaving them with slightly false impressions rather than actively telling them. I mean, because he really could have done a better job. On the Pensky file, they joke that he basically went to Wikipedia to pick a random M-class planet image and put it on the screen instead of doing some legwork there. And so, maybe that's him emulating what Paul Ekman talks about in Telling Lies, which is deception guilt. Maybe, and again, this depends on the sensitivity of his capacity. Well, I don't know, because tactically, deception guilt is not useful, even in the emulation of it, and he certainly doesn't have that later. But that's also after he has the emotion chip. So I don't know. It's kind of a subtlety in his development that we're looking at here. Is at what level is he, and maybe he becomes a better liar later on when he gets more tactical training or something. I also recently saw The Measure of a Man, where they talk about, what if there's an army of datas, and we just send a bunch of different datas out, and that begins to become sort of Will Smith iRobot territory, where we're like, well, if all the robots can lie to us, then God help us. So Yeah, interesting questions. The ethics of androids and deception, because I mean, this is a hop, skip, and a jump away from Blade Runner, which sadly enough, Ben was going to be on his favorite film as well. Ben was recently added to the team, but yeah. Anyway, there's a lot of distinctions. I think that's about it for me. Do you guys have some closing thoughts you want to put in about this episode or about what we talked about?
I got one thing.
Please.
So in the part where they're all sitting around the long conference table and Data's giving his nonsense stories about why the plants grew, look at Data's neck. They did not put his makeup on his neck.
No.
His neck is skin colored and his face is white.
Oh, interesting. Well, I'll have to go back. I'm not the kind of Star Trek fan that will look for. I mean, I will note it after someone has told me. But yeah, I guess actually, you know, the real meaning of this episode is Data's guilt over deceiving the Enterprise crew to where he goes slightly insane and rips the skin off of his neck, or actually decides to color himself. He colors himself like humans.
Yeah, maybe that's his shame coming out on his neck there.
Yeah, okay, yeah, it's a psychosomatic.
It's some kind of self-imposed vitiligo.
Yeah.
Well, yes. Clues, comma, or Data's shame. So for ratings, we always end this episode with ratings. Tyler, let's start with you and your closing thoughts if you got more, man.
I don't know if I should leave it a secret. It's pretty boring.
What? No, please.
Well, I give it an 8, although I would have preferred if Data had killed someone.
That would have been a truly interesting and different episode. Data faces the trolley problem. Yes. I really want someone to have written that episode somewhere. Data has to kill someone for the rest of the crew to live. Okay.
No, that would be good. That would be dark.
That would be terrible.
Maybe they could do that in the new Captain Picard show.
No.
Bring back the elderly android. Why is he elderly? Who knows?
Yeah, I don't think Brent Spiner is coming back. I met Brent Spiner in Las Vegas, and I was like, so yeah, what's up, man? He was just kind of generally grumpy and consternated, and he was like, yeah, you know, I couldn't keep playing him because, like, he's an android. They don't age. They're not supposed to. And what's funny is his mind was so wrapped up in that one idea. The actor, it was surprising to me, given, you know, his longstanding association with science fiction, that, like, there couldn't be some explanation or something. I got the sense that he was tired. He was tired of Data, which that's you know, the Star Trek typecasting thing. Anyway, my rating is I'd say a 9. It's a solid 9. It's a good episode. It's enjoyable. There's a certain level of, like, I don't know, universal pizzazz appeal that I think things like, you know, Wrath of Khan or Best of Both Worlds has. But again, I don't want to confuse action with Star Trek, like the Kelvin timeline is often accused of. So, I mean, all right. Well, maybe a 9.3. It was decent. It was solid. And I don't think it was missing anything. I can't think of anything specific that would have made it better, though. Maybe Worf getting hit a couple more times.
Yes, both wrists.
And then he's rubbing one wrist. He's rubbing both his wrists when he comes in. Okay. Richard.
I give it a 9 point. Very good. And the things that are keeping it down are, I don't think they really solved the problem in the end. They're just like, we're going to do it again, and we're going to do a better job this time, and they don't explain what they're going to do with those little plants. And the other issue is that, you know, when they finally do get to the horrible secret at the end, the Paxtons, then it just becomes very talky, and they just sort of say what happened, and, you know, you can see it. But yeah, I think that the horrible secret at the end could have been more horrible than the Paxtons, basically. So 9.2.
Oh, yeah. So ironically enough, it wasn't, I guess, Lovecraftian enough for you. It wasn't like, yeah. And then I kind of, you know, I hear the criticism of needing for there to have been a resolution. And I personally feel like if they had given a clear answer to the resolving, or like maybe they could have distinguished about humanity in a resounding and continuing with them sort of way that their curiosity needs to be held in check at certain times. Like there is, I mean, you could say it dissolves the philosophical quandary, the paradoxical open question, if they give you a straight answer like, it was our curiosity. But then again, I mean, there doesn't seem to be a real lesson learned by the crew in this instance. So, yeah, you kind of messed up if you do, messed up if you don't resolve the quandary. So, finally, PhD in nothing. We'll never cease loving that. What would you rate this episode as?
I'm going to give it, if I can do points, now that I understand I can do points, I'm going to give it an 8.5. So, and the reason for that, I do think it's a solid episode. We talked about that at the beginning. And much because of this conversation, you guys have really elevated the score for me because there really is a lot in it. I think it was probably what drew me to it in the first place. And the only thing that really sort of knocked it down was Troy's acting. But otherwise, it's a pretty solid episode. And I guess if Wesley Crusher had actually broken Worf's wrist a second time, that would have made it better too.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, listeners of this fine, fair podcast, we thank you for joining us. Daniel, thank you especially for joining us. It was a pleasure having you on, man.
Thank you. It was great to be on.
And Richard, Tyler?
Goodbye, all.
It's a pleasure. Delicious apple.
Definitely dislike if you happen not to have liked for some reason. Subscribe and share and comment below on your thoughts on this episode. We really appreciate y'all. Have a wonderful night.